Hello everyone, welcome to the video. Today we are trying to understand how different people take decisions in face of risks and uncertainty, and we break down each concept mathematically, and at the end we understand through graphs how different people take different decisions. We define two types of people: risk loving individual and risk averse individual. Now, by their names, you can simply realize that one type of person loves to take risks and the other person doesn't. But under what situations? Does the risk loving person always take a risk, or the risk averse person always avoid a risk? Let's try to find that out. We have to understand in our analysis that whatever happens, they both always maximize utility. The risk loving person maximizes his or her utility by accepting a risk, whereas the risk averse person will maximize his utility by avoiding a risk. It is necessary to understand the concept of expected wealth before we move forward. You may all know how to find the expected value of a random variable. We multiply the probability of the random variable with that value of the random variable and we sum all the events up. If I play a game of coin toss with you, and if I say that if you win you can get rupees 200 and if you lose you have to pay me rupees 50, you will realize that our expected wealth in this case is rupees 75. If I play a more complex game, for you to just understand the concept even better, if I tell you that if I toss the coin 3 consecutive times and if you get the same face consecutively 3 times, you win 500, otherwise you have to pay me 200. Your expected wealth in this case arrives as rupees 25. It is important to realize that although you will not get rupees 75 or minus rupees 25 with certainty, it just signifies that if you play this game with me infinite number of times, you will end up with this amount of money which we know as expected wealth. Now let's say you and I go to a casino where they have two types of games. One game you can win 600 with a probability of 0.4 and lose 400 with a probability of 0.6. You can also choose not to play and you win 0 rupees. The probability of you winning 0 rupees if you don't play is 1. Now the second game goes like, if you win you can win rupees 1000 with a probability of half. The probability of you winning is half, and if you lose there is a probability of 0.5 that you lose 900 rupees. Even if you don't play this game, you get 50 rupees from the casino as a bonus or a cashback. You will notice that in each game the expected wealth for the games are the same. In the first game, if you play or you don't play, your expected wealth is 0, and the second game, even if you play or don't play, your expected wealth is 50. We can now see that in each case, in each game, there is a risky option and a safe option to make the same amount of money. In the first case, we can make 0 rupees with the risky or the safe option, or in the second case, we can make 50 rupees with the safe or the risky option. Now, regardless of what you do, let's see what a risk-loving person would do. A risk-loving person, when he faces such a situation where he finds the same amount of expected wealth in both cases, takes the risk always. And a risk-averse person does the opposite, he avoids the risk. We have to realize that the reason they do that is just because they are maximizing the utility. As I told you before, the risk-loving person maximizes the utility by taking the risk, and the risk-averse person does it by avoiding the risk. So to further understand what is actually a risk-loving person, what is actually a risk-avoiding person, let's understand the concept of expected utility. If before you're taking a gamble, you can have some kind of idea, some kind of probability whether you're going to be happy or sad after that outcome, but you cannot really have absolute certainty that yes, if this happens, I'm definitely going to win this gamble, or I'm definitely going to lose this gamble, and I'm going to be happy or sad. So we form the concept of expected utility. In expected utility, we say that there are two types of events: a favorable outcome H, which is happy, and an unfavorable outcome S, which is sad. You derive utility f of H and f of S from each case. H and S is simply the random variable connected with happiness and sadness. and your probability of being happy and sad are pH and PS respectively. Your expected utility, very similar to what your expected wealth is the sum of random variables multiplied by their probability, PHFH plus PSFS. These types of utility functions are called Neumann Morgenstern utility functions. Now, we saw before that facing the same amount of expected wealth, a risk-loving person takes a risk. Why does he take the risk? Now we have an answer. His expected utility from the gamble is greater than expected utility from his certain outcome. We put the formula of these events and we find the value, the equation or the inequality in the green box. PHFH plus PSFS is greater than f of certain outcome. Similarly, the risk-averse person is having a different count of utility function, so his expected utility from his certain outcome is different than his expected utility from the gamble he is playing. We substitute these events by their utility functions and we find the second utility function in the green box here. Let's compare these two types of people now by their utility functions. I substitute E with PHH plus PSS. I do this because I know that the certain outcome is equal to the expected wealth. I have taken the conditions like this, that this condition holds. E is equal to PHH plus PSS. I also consider that the probability of happiness and its sum with sadness is 1. That is, you will either be happy or you will be sad. You can not be neither or you can't be both. They are mutually exclusive and exhaustive events. If I substitute E with PHH plus PSS in the green box equation and I substitute the value of PS with 1 minus PH in the same green box equation, I form this very complex inequality. It is not necessary for you to remember this, but please notice that it takes the form of a concave function. If I substitute pH with lambda and h with x, I get this inequality which is followed by convex functions only. Similarly, in the case of risk-averse person, I take the same substitutions and I see that this inequality of the risk-averse person is taking the form of a concave function. This highlighted in orange function is specifically a property of a concave function. Now we are going more into depth and realizing that a risk-loving person has a convex function, whereas a risk-averse person has a concave function. Let's see how it turns out when we graph this. When we graph wealth on the x-axis and expected utility on the y-axis, and we take two random variables s and h, which signify sadness and happiness or losing and winning, we can also plot their expected utility, or in this case the certain utility, when they are happy or when they are sad. I find their expected wealth, or in this case the wealth of the certain outcome, by this formula PHH plus 1 minus PHS. I have described this before, and similarly I find the utility it derives from the certain outcome. Now you may notice that his expected utility from the gamble will not lie on this curve, which is the utility curve. It will lie above the utility curve on a line joining Fs and Fh, the two utilities we get from the two outcomes, favorable and unfavorable. We can say that the expected utility is just a weighted average of the two utilities we get from sadness and happiness. You will always see in this case that in case of a convex function, the expected utility is higher than the normal utility or the utility from certain outcome. So we can clearly see and therefore be confirmed that for a risk-loving person, he will always take the risk instead of avoiding the risk if he wants to maximize his utility. Similarly, we can see the same case for a risk-averse person. For a risk-averse person, his expected utility lies below this blue dot, which is his utility from a certain outcome. Therefore, if he wants to maximize his utility, he has to avoid the gamble. This is where I end my video. In the next video, we will see how we can manipulate the data and manipulate the conditions these people have to face and what kind of decisions they take in uncertain situations if we give them some incentive can we convince a risk averse person to take a risk, or we convince a risk loving person to avoid a risk?